digestional system
They
has
want to hear
inflicted
the voices of the
I
people in
believe
the
this is
White
happening to us. So America would never do a thing like this to us.
I am who they say I am. Ossie Davis, actor, writer, director, minor colored movie star, celebrity, and an activist. The fires of hell of which I dream, from which I flee, the focus of my growing agitation consists of the following words, which I found in the New York Times on November 8th. I quote in part. The world population stands at 6.1 billion, double what it was in 1960. 2 billion people already lack sufficient food and water. Water use has increased 6 times over the past 70 years. 50 years from now, 4.2 billion people will be living in countries where their basic needs cannot be met. Poor people depend more directly on natural resources, such as available land, wood, and water, and yet they suffer most from environmental degradation. That was spoken by Thoraya Obaid, Executive Director of the United Nations. The increasing impact on the environment resulted not only from growing population, but also from a rising affluence and unsustainable consumption patterns. The world's wealth is some $30 trillion, but half of the world lives on $2 a day or less. The message here is clear, she added. While some of us practice wasteful consumption, others cannot consume enough to survive. It would seem to me that the world is being divided more and more between the haves and the have-nots. Which side am I on? I am talent for sale, image for hire, celebrity for rent to the highest bidder, doing piecework on the Hollywood plantation. Is it really necessary for me to make a choice? Maybe I can remain suspended far above it all, secure in the knowledge that I have rights and privileges protected by the Constitution and by the greatest pile of money and military might in human history. No matter what is happening to the rest of the world, down among the have-nots, I'm doing all right. Which side of the great and growing divide between those who got it and those who ain't am I on? I know Harriet Tubman would have answered when she was a free person up north and the rest of us were still stuck in bondage and enslaved pens down south. She would have sided with the haves and left us slaves. She could, rather, have sided with the haves and left us slaves to the mercy of our masters. But no, she sneaked back into Maryland time and time again, freed her people, a few slaves at a time. I know which side she was on. I know how old John Brown would have answered in his day, the man who could have become a prosperous farmer, or he could have been a slaveholder himself, growing rich off the unpaid labor of my ancestors. But instead, he formed his own little brigade and went down to Harper's Ferry to try and free the slaves. It cost him his life. I know which side he was on. And what about Frederick Douglass? He escaped from slavery in Maryland and went north, where he too could have chosen to stay put. But no, not Frederick Douglass. He was a newspaper man, an orator, an agitator. He wouldn't let the country rest as he boldly put himself in harm's way, raging up and down and demanding freedom for his enslaved brothers and sisters. I know which side he was on. And W.E.B. Du Bois, who helped to found the NAACP, created a magazine which he called The Crisis. and used it in a frontal assault against lynching and Jim Crow and institutional segregation until the walls came tumbling down in the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954. And what about A. Philip Randolph, who went to jail for his writings on behalf of the poor and the dispossessed? Then he formed a union to lead them in their fight to escape from poverty. And Mary McLeod Bethune, who took her people's cause all the way to the White House, where she agitated for the rights of African Americans. And Marian Anderson, who stood out in the cold on an Easter morning on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial after being turned down because of her color by the Daughters of the American Revolution, and never sang a word, and sang the story of her have-not brothers and sisters. And Paul Robeson, who never sang a word that was not also a weapon in his fight for all the dispossessed peoples of the earth. Even when they took his passport, he still found a way to sing all the way across the ocean by telephone. And most certainly, Martin Luther King Jr., who recognized the poor and the despised, the rejected, as his brothers, and was on his way to Memphis, and there they shot him down. And Malcolm X too, and Fannie Lou Hamer. They saw the world being divided between the haves and the have-nots and stood on the corners screaming till they died. There is no question which side they were on. But now the same question faces me. Am I really required, as they were, to put my life on the line? September 11, 2001 leaves me no hiding place. Civilization itself hangs in the balance. It cannot exist in a world half rich and half starving. I leave you with the question still unanswered, hanging above my mirror, my conscience and my mind. In a world where half the people live on $2 a day or less, which side am I on? Which side are you on?